Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All good? Way at the back? Sweet. Hi, my name is Rus Scammel. I'm the technical product manager with Unity for 2D. But I don't want to talk about myself. I want to know about who I'm speaking to. So we have a nice full room, so thank you very much for showing up. How many of you are artists? Get a show of hands. High and proud. Very cool. Okay. How many designers? Okay. How many of you are artists that call yourselves designers? Okay. How about any coders in the room? Many hands. There we go. Okay. Awesome. Right. So we're at a developer conference. So I assume there's a lot of coders in the room. So there's going to be a bit of scripting later on. Not much. Just a little bit. How many producers? Any producers in the room? Cool. The guys that make it happen. Very, very cool. Okay. So what we want to talk about today is building organic 2D worlds with Sprite Shape. Now, Sprite Shape is a feature in Unity that we're going to dig into today. We're going to spend a lot of time in Unity. We're going to look at a few slides just to get started, and then we'll dig in. Okay. How many of you are making 2D games? Making 2D games right now, and how many of you want to make 2D games, but you're not doing it yet? Okay, cool, excellent. How many Unity developers? Okay, very cool. So 2D world building in Unity, let's do a quick review, right? What would you normally do? How would you build your worlds in 2D? And typically for years, you've just made sprites, right? And then you make them really, really nice shapes, very cool, for your levels and your characters, and you just drag those into Unity. Or you can use 9-slice sprites, right? So this is kind of, you're starting to get into the area of layouts and world building, but not really. So if we look at the example in the middle, that's kind of a 9-slice sprite. And then over the last couple of years, we've built and shipped tilemap. So tilemap is good if you're doing grid-based worlds, right? So if you're doing those strategy games or RPGs where you have grids, isometric or rectangular or hexagonal, these are all very important. But what if your level is freeform, right? What if it's just crazy and amazing and smooth and loopy and you want to do all this really exciting stuff with it? At the moment, you'd have to make some sprites, right? Lots and lots of sprites, really big sprites. So let's look at a tool in Unity that helps us do organic base layout. So these two examples here are the kind of levels that you could put together with Sprite Shape. So the idea is that you basically define a spline, and then you define a bunch of sprites that go along with that spline, and that will tile along the edge or to fill that shape, right? Hence the name Sprite Shape. Sprite Shape is available as a package, so you have to get the package manager in Unity to get hold of it. It's in preview at the moment, and we are still making small tweaks, performance tweaks, changes. So I'll encourage you again at the end to please jump into the forums and take a look at Sprite Shape and then let us know what you think. But for today, let's actually start using this thing. So let's look at the parts that come together to form Sprite Shape. So we've got the Sprite Shape profile. This is where you define some of your config about how sprite shapes should be drawn. What are they? What are the sprites that go into them? We'll get into all of that in detail. The sprite shape renderer is a component that you attach to an object in scene so that it can render this sprite shape data. And then you've got a sprite shape controller, and this allows you control over the actual shape. So we're going to look at how to build a basic example. And then we're going to look at the special case of corners, right? Or the corner case. Any devs in the room get that joke? Never mind. And then we're going to look at a specific example, right? Let's say you're trying to build a platformer with Sprite Shape. What are the features and considerations that you want to think about when you're trying to build a platformer? And then at the very end, I'll show you some scripting where you can access the Sprite Shape data itself and also the Sprite Shape controller Spline and do some interesting stuff with it. So the first example I want to show you is the most basic one, right? So if you've got an empty scene like this and you want to make a sprite shape, the first thing you got to do is come into your project and create a Sprite Shape profile. So I'm going to make one of those now. So here you can do create and then scroll, scroll, scroll. Sprite Shape profile. Okay, that's what you want to do. And we want to make an empty one. Now let's look at this tool here. Right? So when you make a Sprite Shape profile, there's a bunch of stuff that shows up in the inspector. But the important thing to remember is that what you're trying to define is angle ranges and what sprite you want to draw at a particular angle range on your spline. And when I talk about angle ranges, I'm talking about the normal on the spline. Okay, so let's see it visually, it'll be easier to understand. So as we look at the angle range, you'll see that I can create my own ranges. I'm going to click here, and I'm creating a range. And this range is for everything that points in this direction, right? Up. And then I'm going to come down here and make another range. And then I'm going to define the sprites to assign to each of these ranges. So I'll select here, and you see below we have a sprite list. So I'm going to make one entry, and I'm going to drag the grass outline sprite in there. So you can see we can, sorry, I think the mic's gone. Can you guys hear me? Is that all right? Okay. So you can see that for all of these angles, I'm going to get a green sprite, right, called grass outline. And when I come down here, I have no sprite defined. So I'm going to use the orange outline. Hang on, make a slot for that, drag it in. Okay, so what exactly have I done? Almost there. One more step. Right at the top, I want to define a fill texture. Okay, so the center of the sprite shape has something to render. And for this, I'm going to use a dark fill. There we go. So it will look like that at the top, like that at the bottom. This is just a preview so that you have some idea of what you're actually building. Let's zoom out, and I'm going to drag this into the scene, and we've got a sprite shape in the scene. Okay, so I made a profile, set up some angle ranges, set up the fill, drag it into the scene. Now that I've got this in the scene, you can see that for all the up angles, it drew green, and for all the down angles, it draws this orange, right? And it's per segment. So at the moment, you may think, well, some of these things are facing up, some of these things are facing down. What if I did this, right? So that's a little bit clearer, I think, right? So as you can see, I can jump right in here and start editing the spline, right? So this is pretty cool. And I can change those point modes. So maybe I want to make all of these point modes like so, right? I'm using the shortcut key M to cycle through the different point modes. And you can see you can pretty quickly start putting together a kind of fun little level, right? You can imagine some cartoony character kind of running around on this. Now we're going to dig into the other details later, but one thing I want to call your attention to right now is I can add a component, Polygon Collider 2D, right? And then in Sprite Shape, now we have a set of controls for Collider, right? And if I turn this on, we auto-fit the Polygon Collider 2D to your Sprite Shape. So you've got your visual set up, right? Normally the next step is you want to get your collision set up so that you can actually use this in a game. But now you can do all of that in one step, right? So everything gets updated accordingly. And if this is not fine enough detail, you can increase the detail of the collider so that it fits those more acute sections of the spline. All right, cool. So that's a simple example. Let's look at a slightly more involved one. Not much more involved, but what if you wanted to build something like this in Unity, right? You would probably use Talmat, right? Because it looks like it's made from tiles. But you can build things like this with Sprite Shape by defining corners. So if you look at the Sprite Shape profile for this castle, it's got the same angle ranges as we had earlier. In this case, there are 4. So you can build as many angle ranges as you want. And we've got one for the top, one for the left, one for the bottom. And that's cool. But we've also got corners set up. So you've got a corner sprite for each top, bottom, right, left, inner, outer, and all of the combinations, right? So that you can define all of these corner sections. So why would you want to do this? What if you want to make an organic shape, kind of a shape that isn't trapped on an axis, right? Or isn't trapped on a grid, but is made up of straight lines. And you want some way of defining the corners. So now I can jump in here and I can just start moving those around, right? And making this a little bit more interesting. So if you're trying to make a more zany, more, interesting style, like so, there you go, right? So you can do something like that. Cool. So again, this is a Sprite Shape profile. You set up the corners in the Sprite Shape profile, and then you bring those into the scene. Now, what if you wanted to have some of the corners turned on and off? You want some control over how that works. So for each of the points on the Sprite Shape, you can go to the corner, drop down, and you can turn that off, right? So you don't have to have a corner. Maybe you want to do something like this, right? Where it's a little bit disjointed and you don't want to define the corner sprite. That's fine too. Okay. So we've looked at two simple examples. Let's look at putting it all together and then adding a few more ideas when we try to build a platformer. Okay, so when you build a platformer, there are a few considerations, right? You probably want reusable parts. So we're going to look at an example where we can use different sprite shapes together, making them work together well. Maybe you're making an endless runner and you want to keep loading parts, right? So you need some way of adding these parts together in a way that's seamless. So this is the platformer example. So let's start here. So first, we're going to make this kind of tall pillar of rock with some grass at the top. And we want to make it look good, right? So let's look at some of the issues with this sprite shape, and then we'll fix them by introducing some of these features. So first of all, we've all seen this by now, right? We know the sprite shape profile. We've got grass on the top, we've got rocks on the side, and that's all great, except I've never seen a grass edge that is that hard, right? It's way too hard. It's like someone sliced it with a razor. So what we want is a nice kind of soft tuft of grass at the edge, and then maybe the rocks can have a little bit of a kind of a rocky edge. Again, the rocks are very hard. So if we look at the sprites that we used to build this, and we actually dig in to the sprite editor, we can see they do have soft edges, right? That's kind of nice. And it has been sliced so that it's been kind of 9 sliced or 3 sliced in this way, so that there are left and right borders, right? And this section in the middle has been designed to tile, and then these are like cat pieces that you put on either side. So how can we use that? Let's go into the grass and rocks, and let's look at use sprite borders right here, right? Right here. Turn that on. That's much better. Okay, but I'm still fussy. I'm not happy about the grass and the rocks being drawn in that order. I want the grass to be drawn on top of the rocks, right? So how can I do this when they're all part of one sprite shape? I don't have order in layer, I don't have sorting layers, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to go into the sprite shape profile, go to this angle range, and then I want you to look at this section here where it says angle range start end and then order, right? So right now they're both set to 0. So it's kind of, you're not sure which one is going to draw first. So we'll leave the rocks at 0. We'll come up to the grass and we'll change that to 1. Okay, and there we go. We've got the result that we want. And because the grass texture even has a little bit of alpha in it, it looks like it's doing a drop shadow on top of the rocks, right? Like that. Cool. Okay. So let's look at reusable parts. Let's look at a left and right platform. How would I work with two platforms that I want to fit together? So if we look at these two, this is my left, right? Some crazy shape, this is my right. First thing you'll notice is that they're not in the right place. The seams don't connect. So we're going to fix the geometric seam, and then we're going to fix the texture seam. So what do? First of all, I go to Edit Spline for this one, and I want to use snapping. So the control points work with snaps so that you can snap to the grid. So I'm going to turn that on, and I'm going to move this down here so that it snaps, and this one as well. Okay, that's about right. So that's good. So geometrically they now match, and I can use these parts together. But if I zoom into this section, you'll notice that there's a texture seam, right? There's a discontinuity from left to right here. So how do we solve this? So of course you can be very careful about the size of your platforms. But again, we want to work with free-form worlds, right? So what we've got is a way of changing how we plot the UVs for this. So you want to change the UVs to world space UVs. If I turn that on, right, now we've got a seamless texture across two sprite shapes. And if you saw it for the first time, you wouldn't know that that was made of two parts. Cool. Now, we've looked at dealing with discontinuities. We've looked at kind of using parts together like this. There are a couple of other little things that you might want to do to make your sprite shape levels a little bit more exciting, a little bit more varied. So the first thing we'll look at is sprite variations. So when we added a sprite just now, you may have noticed that it was a list of sprites per angle range. So you can define more than one, right? So if we look at this example, grass top actually also has grass top with small rocks and grass top with flowers, right? So if I wanted to go into my sprite shape level and add a little bit of variety, I can just come here, select this, there we go, and go into the sprite index and change it from 0 to 1. Right? So from that point onwards, it will display the variation that I chose. I can also come in here and maybe I want to add some flowers to this part. So I'm going to change this one to sprite index 2. Right? Okay, now I'm happy. This is starting to look a bit more exciting. Now you might feel tempted to add more serious variations here. It can work, but you need to think about how you're using your sprite shapes for your levels. What you probably want to do is add another object, right, that is bound to the sprite shape. We'll look at an example of how to do that towards the end. Okay, so far we've been looking at sprite shapes that use both the outer edge as well as the fill. Right? But there are use cases for using only one, right? So let's look at the first example. This is what's called an open-ended sprite shape. Okay, it's the same texture. We've seen it over and over now. This is grass top. And if we look at how we've set up the controller, you'll notice that I've got open-ended checked here, right? So it doesn't use the fill. Okay. The other thing you may notice is that it's kind of doing this weird thing where it's tapering off into nothing, right? So to do that, if we go into the control point, you'll notice that there is also a height slider. So you can actually change this, right? In the current version of Sprite Shape, this doesn't match the collider that gets generated, but this is a solve that we are working on for the next version. Okay, so you got a sprite shape that just uses the edge. What would you do if you only use the fill? Okay, so let's look at the sprite shape profile first. This is a sprite shape profile that has no edge defined and has a tiny texture called tree fill, which is just 64 by 64. And the reason we did that, it's got a bit of a gradient on it, but you could make it really, really small. Right, that's fine. And we've applied it to this sprite shape. And this one. And this one. So if we look at the game view, now you can see that we've got a whole lot of different stuff that's all been constructed out of sprite shapes, right? So we've got the ones with the edge and the fill, we've got this zany looking one that tapers to the side, and then we've got all of these trees at the back that were made with sprite shapes that only had a fill. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about now is what you can do with scripts, a little bit, right? A small example. And to do that, I'm going to use the assets from a game called Flipping Death, which we modified slightly. This is Flipping Death by Zoink Games. It's a really cool game where you can kind of switch between the world of the afterlife and the world of the living, right? Has anyone played that? Flipping Death? You should check it out. It's really, really cool. So here's an example of one of their levels, right? And what we've got here is we've got Sprite Shape set up as the ground here, right? That's the only Sprite Shape in the level. You might think the hills at the back are Sprite Shapes, but they're not. And what we want to do here is we want to see how we can get these houses to be grounded to the Sprite Shape itself, right? So you've built all of this nice level stuff. You've done all the layout. You know how the gameplay should work, but now you want to kind of decorate it with stuff, right? And the final result is pretty cool. You can jump into the scene here, select your sprite shape. I'm going to make the collider. Should we turn it off? No, I think we're good. There we go. That's clearer. And then let's take a look at what we can do in terms of changing the spline. So you would expect to be able to edit this, which is normal, right? But then you can see these houses, they're actually mounted onto these points, right? So you can move them up and down, and they will stick to the sprite shape, and they will also respond to changes in the tangent, right? So you can lay out your levels really easily and have your decorator objects kind of stick to them. So how do we do this? So we'll dig in a little bit into how this works by looking at a script. Okay, and the only script I want to show you here is the one that's attached to the buildings, and that is place at sprite shape point. We'll be adding these scripts as well as a couple of other ones that we've been working on to the sprite shape samples, so that when you get the samples along with the package, you can see how this stuff works and then modify it for your own projects. So in this example, we've got something that can update at runtime. It takes the index of something from sprite shape, and then it places itself at that point. Let's take a look at the code. Okay, so very briefly, if we look at how this has been constructed, give me a sec. There we go. So this is the place at sprite shape point. This is the line that I want to make sure you know about. You can do this. You can get sprite shape controller. I should zoom in a bit. .spline, right? So if you have a sprite shape controller in your scene and you want access to the spline, there is a Unity Engine U2D spline. And once you get that, you can do some cool stuff, right? So you can go in there and you can get point count, you can get left tangent, get right tangent, you can set up the tangent modes, you can do all this kind of stuff that you want to do. When you get the script, you can modify it, make it work for what you want. Okay, so the next example I want to show you to do with scripting is this one. So this one's a little bit crazier, really fun. The idea here is I want to track the points that my mouse is creating as I move around, and then I want to take those points and reduce them down to a minimum set of points, like a nice small set of points. And then I want to do a curve fit. I want to generate a Bezier curve that will run through each of those points, right? So the final result of that is that I can end up doing something like this. So here's the sprite shape brush script, right? And I want to choose paint. I've got very simple GUI in the level so I can see where my kind of brush tip would be. And I'm going to do this, right? So you can end up painting your sprite shapes. And one of the nice results you get from this is that the polygon stuff just gets, the polygon collider gets updated automatically. So again, you're painting and you're getting collision really easily, right? So I'm going to set that back up. Where were we? Something like so. Not quite right. Let me try again. Bear with me. Art skills at a podium. Okay, that'll do. One more try. Oh, okay, I'll live with it. So how do we do this, right? So this one, all of the stuff happens in the editor code. So I'm going to dig into Sprite Shape. I think it's the Sprite Shape brush editor, which is where we do a lot of the stuff. This does use Burning Mime's implementation of Philip J. Schneider's least squares method for fitting Bezier curves to a set of points. So I'll give you a link to that later so you can have a look at, study how it's done. But the one thing I want to draw attention to here is the fact that we do this. So you do all of this stuff, you build up your scene, you get the points, you set the left tangent, set the right tangent because you've built that spline. And then finally, I want you to know that you can do this. You can do update collider. So you've got your Sprite Shape controller and you can do bake collider, right? Now, it's probably tempting to want to do this a lot. Don't do this in your update loop all the time. This takes a bit of processing. But if you do it in the right part in your games, if you do it at a construction kind of stage or where you have enough overhead to do it, it'll be fine. So yes, you can do it at runtime as well. So back here, I've got a couple of other rocks here. Let's unhide those. And we can see what we built. There we go. Isn't that sweet? Hang on, one more trick. Hey, physics. Cool. Okay. So we've seen kind of all these different ways that we can use Sprite Shape to build simple stuff, complex stuff, toony stuff, square stuff. But also there's a lot of consideration to how you may want to reuse these parts, how you may want to build variations, and what you want to do in terms of scripting. External resources that you probably want. This is Burning Mime C# implementation of that least squares method. Very, very cool stuff, very interesting. If you're building one of those physics puzzler games, I know I've always wanted to build one of those. It's github.com Burning Mime curves. Has everyone taken a photo? And try out the package. So all you need to do is just get the latest beta. It works with non-beta as well, but get the latest beta because we're changing these preview packages a lot. And just pick it up from the package manager UI. You'll notice as you go into the Pac-Man UI, there's a lot of 2D animation, 2D IK, 2D pixel perfect. A lot of our features are being built as packages because we're getting a lot of interest. People are talking to us a lot, and we're developing them as packages so we can move faster. How many of you have used any of the 2D packages? Can I get a show of hands? Ah, okay, cool. So check them out. There's a lot of good stuff in there, and more of the development is moving in that direction. But thank you very much to those of you who are already using them. I always like to end on a bit of call to action, like what can you do, right? So you've come here, you've listened to this talk, you know what we're working on in Unity. We don't make games ourselves, right? So we want to make sure that we deliver tools to you that support the way you're working, right? That support the projects, the hopes and dreams of the things that you want to deliver to your users. So check out the preview packages, jump into the forums and let us know, right? What's working, what's not working. You already let us know what's not working, so thank you for that. But also, if you have improvements to suggest, you want us to do things for your projects, you want to describe your workflows to us, that's always very useful. But most important of all, keep making amazing 2D experiences in Unity. Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? Are we set up for questions? Yes. When will it be production ready? Am I paraphrasing that correctly? So production ready, it depends on the activity in the forums and what everyone is saying. We're aiming for early to mid next year. Yeah, it's been in preview now for about 9 months. So it's getting pretty solid. I mean, I did a lot of really funky stuff just now with strange curves, and I'm doing weird things, and it's just standing up. That being said, the more people use it, the more it'll be robust. So it's chicken and egg, right? We can release it now, and then it might break. Or if you use it, then it gets some production experience, right? We're also looking to work with studios who want to use this in their games. They want to take the risk of using a preview package. We want to know who you are. Let us know. Maybe we could collaborate. We could look at your use case, and we can see if there's something that we can work on together. Yeah, because that will help us as well. We want our features to be battle tested. Yeah, of course. Yes. At the moment, it's mainly GL. We haven't done any tests on HTML5, but we are working closely with the Project Tiny team, if anyone is following that development. So the idea is to get as many of the 2D features kind of in that space as possible, but within reason, right? Within reason. This could work, but we may need to pare down some of the functionality. Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. As a UI element, no. But you can use it as a UI element. You're asking whether you can use it with a UI system, right? No, not at the moment. Is that a strong request? Is that something that is required? It is? Yeah, okay. We'll take it on board. Thank you. Thanks again, everyone.